I am so thrilled to have the retired Colonel Eileen Collins with us today. Eileen's written a book. If you don't know her name, you will now. Eileen is, she's written a book called Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars. It's the story of the first American woman to command a space mission. So welcome to Dominate Your Day.
Thank
Eileen,
you.
I
Thank
have
you.
so many
Looking
questions
forward
to
to
ask.
it.
Yes, I mean, we talk here about authenticity and leading authentically. And I read your book and I was reading through just how you had to get through so many hurdles to be the first American woman to command a space shuttle. I mean, I can't even imagine. So how how do you immediately, when you think of that, people hear about what you've done, but I want to go a little deeper. I want to hear about the internal work that was going on in your mind and your heart and your soul when you visioned yourself doing this.
Well, there's so many different things that I can say about that, but I'm going to lock onto a word that you said earlier, and that's the word authentic.
Mm,
And I like that. I don't always hear people use that word authentic. And I find in myself and in many people that I've worked with, men and women both, a need to kind of fill an image of what's expected of you. Let's say you get promoted, you're in a new position at work, and you feel like I have to be this image, or I have to be like the person who had this before me, or I have to be like my role model, or something like that. I think that drains a lot of energy out of a person. And I found myself trying to do that. The word authentic is really important about being yourself and having confidence in who you are, because I think you will have more integrity in as everyone knows, you can usually see through a fake person pretty quickly. I mean, even children can do that. I would, but back up to one of, I would say, the best advice that I got before I went in for my astronaut interview. This is many years ago, but someone told me, just go in there, Eileen, and be yourself.
mm,
Don't try to be something you're not. And I
mhm.
took that advice and they hired me. And I actually didn't think I would. I actually was amazed that they hired me. I thought I would have to at least interview 3 or 4 times, but I got in on the first try. And I think by being authentic, and maybe if I got halfway through a sentence and needed to go back and correct what I said, that's showing a little bit of humility. And I want to say some confidence in yourself, that you're not afraid to go back and reword something, or maybe correct something that you said or did, or even admit that you made a mistake. Uh,
Mm.
and I have, in my book, this is the last thing I'll say about being authentic, unless you want to keep talking about it. In my book, I talk about mistakes that I made throughout my career. And I find that many of the astronaut books, or even some of the pilot books before me, don't really talk about the mistakes that the pilot made or that the astronaut made. I think it's so important that we learn from the mistakes of the people that went before us. And we all make mistakes. In fact, I even have a 4 step process for dealing with mistakes. And
Really?
just very briefly, the first
Yeah.
one is you acknowledge that you made a mistake to yourself,
Mm,
to the people that need to know, you acknowledge you made a mistake. The second one is you fix the mistake. The third one is do something to prevent it from happening again to you or to someone else. And then the fourth step is to move on. Don't dwell on your mistakes. And that was one of my biggest problems. I couldn't get the mistake out of my mind. I think about it for days and weeks and months, and oh, how am I going to recover? And you'll see the examples in the book. One time I took an airplane through a hailstorm. I didn't want to do that, but it happened because I was slow in making a decision to declare an emergency. What I learned is many things, but I could have lost my life in that situation. So, through the mistakes I've made over the years, I developed the 4 step process. And I taught my children. They keep
mm.
telling me, Mom, we know, you don't have to keep reminding us. But every time I make a mistake, I run that 4 steps through my thought process. And I think it really helps me to continue, being an authentic person and moving on with confidence.
I love how you say acknowledge, fix, and then what are you going to do to prevent it and then move on. I think the hardest part for some of us leaders are exactly what you talked about, to move on. We want to just kind of keep reminiscing about it. How do you move on?
Yep. Well, moving on is, I think if you do the first three steps of that, it helps you move on. And the
Mm,
first one is admitting your mistake. And, I think if you, in the flying world, if you try to cover up a mistake, it could mean someone's life. So we do not cover up mistakes in the flying world. But I
mm,
remember growing up as a kid, I used to try to cover up, like I broke something in the house.
mm.
Or I remember my daughter, she was in kindergarten. This is human nature, by the way. She
Yeah.
came home, she had a note from the teacher that she had, that the note said, which we found like 3 months later, hidden in the back of a closet.
Oh my
She took,
goodness.
she's like 5 years old. She took the teacher's note and put it all the way in the back of the closet. And we never saw it until 3 months had gone by. And the note said, your daughter has damaged my Play Doh. She mixed the colors together, and I am requesting for you to replace my Play Doh.
Oh my goodness.
And she got a little mark. She didn't get a smiley face that day. She got a little red, frowny face. So raising kids tells you a lot about human nature. And I learned that human nature is you want to
Mm,
hide your mistakes. We
mhm.
can't do that. We're all adults. We need to work together and think about these things. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things about moving on, and then using the team to help you work through things together. And I also find that mistakes aren't always the individual's fault. And you find this in the flying world. It could be a procedural, like maybe you made a mistake, but step two, or step three is to do something to prevent it from happening again. Maybe there was something missing from the procedure that you were supposed to memorize, but that's asking too much. I think that if you have, and I'm a very procedural person, I like to write things down. I have lists, I have procedures, and you want to make sure that whatever is written for the employee, or whatever your job position is, that isn't missed in the paperwork. So there's probably something that can be done, so you don't always want to blame yourself. So I think that's how I'd answer the question, moving on and doing
Mhm,
it together as a team, and always keep that vision of, what are we doing, where are we going, what
mhm,
is the mission statement of my company, what is
mhm.
the mission statement that I have for myself in my personal life, and always get back to that mission statement. And I think having a little bit of humility and being a good listener goes along with being a good leader and a good person who executes
I love
whatever
that.
it is that we're trying to do.
I love that you brought up mission statement because I think that's something that a lot of people don't have their own personal mission statement. They might have a mission statement, and of course, working as a retired colonel, you had a mission probably as, in your role there. But have you always had a personal mission statement as well?
Well, this is interesting because I wouldn't have called it that back when I was, let's take, for example, back when I was 21 years old and I started Air Force pilot training. I was in the first class of women to go through pilot training at my base in Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma. There were four of us, four women. We were part of a test program. Can women fly military aircraft? Well, of course, the answer is yes, but we had to prove to the Air Force, which is mainly a bunch of older men that thought that women couldn't fly, we had to prove to them that we could do it. And we knew we could. So, my mission statement, although I didn't call it that back then, but what I told myself when I started that training, I am going to be the best pilot I can be. And that is my focus for the year. And I was not just doing it for me, I was doing it for all the women that would be following us. Because if we had not passed that test program, it could have closed the doors for women in the future. So, again, we're doing it for ourselves because we wanted to be pilots, but we're doing it uh, for all the women in the future. And I'm happy to say, as you know, that the women passed. There were many of us. There were several classes. The women passed the flight training, and a couple of years. I think the test program went on for 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years, and then women were allowed into the program. So I think staying focused on, my mission is to be the best pilot I can be. I think
Mm,
that is the simplest mission statement we can have, whatever it is that you want to do or that you are doing in your life. I want to be the best at this that I can be. And when things start happening to you that pull you away from that mission statement, you need to recognize that, because that was happening to us. Like, we would have the media people would come in and, like, oh, we want to put you on the evening news, or we
mm,
want you to come down and be a speaker at our local event here in town. we had to say no to those things because if we were out like promoting ourselves as individuals, that would take time away from being the best pilot we could be. So that was an example of like making tough decisions to stay focused on the mission. And I will say our wing commander was great because he eventually told us you're not allowed to do any activities off base while you're a student in pilot training. And so that really helped us.
So I love that you talked in that story about how you had to say some no to some good things. I mean, you were creating history with being the first women to fly advance, right? Was that hadn't happened before because they just started letting women come in into the Air Force at that point. Is that correct? At that moment?
That's right. Yeah, Vance Air Force Base started training pilots in 1944 for World War II. And from 1944 until 1978, only men went through training. Now, my class came in, there was a class of, I think there were about 50 of us in the class, four women in the class. Now,
Mm.
on the base overall, there were over 500 pilots if you include all the instructors and all the students. So we really stood out, um,
Mm.
and everybody knew how the women were doing in training. The commanders were asking, what kind of grades are the women getting? People could hear our voices on the radio. And that was something very novel back in the late 1970s, just a woman's voice on the military airways. We got a couple of jokes over the airways. Couldn't let the jokes bother me. Actually, sometimes they were funny, sometimes they weren't. But whether they were or not, you get an emotional reaction from a air traffic controller saying something like Reno 21, is your seatbelt too tight? And they would say things like that on the radio, and you can get mad about it and it'll affect your flying, or you can laugh at it and that'll affect your flying. We just had to stay focused through all these little side comments that would happen. I will say that the guys that we worked with were great. I There were probably some people that didn't want us there. I would say mostly from mid-level management. The bosses, the commanders loved having the women there for whatever reason. They really tried. They really liked us and they tried to get us through the training as best they could. And
Mm.
I would say our classmates were really great. We all worked together to help each other get through training. But sometimes a culture, I've learned over the years, regardless of if it's the military or a civilian organization, sometimes the cultural problems are in the middle of the organization, meaning mid-level management or supervisory roles. Sometimes I'd come across people that didn't want the women there,
Mm.
and I just had to say, well, that's their problem. I'm just going to keep doing the best job that I can. And I'm happy to say that I've had guys come up to me towards the end of training and say, it's really been great having the women here. And they'd
Mm.
say, the language is cleaned up, or the
I
guys
bet.
are trying harder. Now the women are here, they don't want to be shown, or they don't want to be shown up by the women. So the guys are trying harder. Or, hey, they're willing to go to the women and say, hey, like maybe ask for help from the women, whereas they wouldn't have asked for help from a guy. So there were a lot of really positive things about having the women there. And this is really important. I want to say one thing to your listeners because I often have like young people, college students ask me, um, the guys are treating me kind of strange in the workplace. They don't want to talk to me, or, they don't look at me, and, I think that sometimes smart women can intimidate the guys around them. And I think we need to be aware that we can be intimidating, and some guys are afraid how to act around us because they're afraid we might bite their head off or say something back to them. And I think the way we get around that is by looking people in the eye and being willing to help them if it looks like maybe they're struggling or they don't understand something, to be willing to help them, or just kind of be nice to people. And I find that that has really helped, I think, in the teamwork in the types of teams that I've worked with, actually throughout my career.
And I can tell just even you having discernment, you had an internal discernment as you were navigating where they were saying something on the radio to you that wasn't probably something you'd want to hear, but having to navigate that and how to your what's your emotional reaction to things. So were there times when you just had to dig deep for internal confidence because things were so hard, whether it be advance or somewhere else as you were advancing in your career up to astronaut? How did you manage that?
Well, I would say it's human nature to doubt yourself at times as you go through life, or you go through school, or you go through a training program, you're in a new job. It is human nature to have doubts about yourself.
Mhm.
That is totally fine to have doubts about yourself. I don't think we should think there's something wrong with this if we're like, oh my gosh, am I in the wrong place? I had a rough day today. I got in an argument with somebody, or, you know, maybe we didn't get the result we wanted. That is the way things are. I've been
Mhm.
in a lot of different jobs in my life, and I've had many, many setbacks. How did I get out of that? I think initially I would get very upset when I was younger, and I would go for a run. I used to be a big runner back when I was younger. I don't run anymore, but I still swim, and I get on the cardio machines, and I find that, and I go for long walks. I think
Mm,
physical exercise is one of the best things that I have done for my mental health, is
mm,
getting out there, and not everybody can run, but I think if you can do something where you get the sweat up for a period of time, I would come out of those running sessions with so many ideas, and it's like it lit up my brain, and I would get more confidence in myself. So that worked for me when I was younger. And again, not everybody can get out there and run, but I think you can go to the gym and get on a treadmill. It's just amazing how good that is for our mental health and our emotional health. But I would just remember what my mission statement is. I'm here to be the best pilot I can be. That was true in the Air Force. That was true when I was an astronaut at NASA. Being the best you can be in what you're doing, and come back and stay focused on it. And the other thing is, I think when you have setbacks and when you make mistakes, there's a
mm,
good element to that, because you become wiser, you're more experienced, you're going to be a better mentor to somebody someday. And I think that I don't think we should intentionally make mistakes, but we should always do our best. But when the mistakes happen, I think we should almost look at them as a gift in
mm.
helping us. Like if you read my book, you'll see that all those mistakes I made, I ended up writing a book and coming up with techniques to recover from those
Mm.
mistakes. And I became an instructor, and I passed that on to my students.
I love that. Tell me about when you were a child, where all this came from. Was there somebody I read a little bit in your book about how you loved going to the airfield and watching the gliders, but was there somebody that you really looked up to that was mentoring you during your childhood or talking to you about this, or was it just something innate that you just found inside yourself?
But for me, I think it was more something more innate. I would say mentors, both of my parents, with all the problems my parents had. I won't go into that now, but my dad was a big drinker. My mother had a lot of issues. My parents split up, and you know, I used to stutter when I was a kid. I had to go to speech lessons, and I was very shy. So I don't think I had like a super great childhood. My family, we had been on welfare and food stamps and
Mm,
Medicaid and things like that. But as I mentioned earlier, I think I grew in wisdom from those times. But one thing in specific I'd like to mention
mhm,
is the influence of books. And
mm,
I'm a big proponent of reading books now. When I was a kid, I would go to the library, and, as a little kid, I'd read about like horses and bugs and dogs and, stuff kids like. But as I got older, I found a section of the library on airplanes. And I started reading about pilots, men and women pilots. And that's why I decided to become a pilot, because of the adventures. And I mean, they were explorers, they were risk takers, they were, flying something new, an airplane. And then I read about military pilots in the struggles that they had, especially the pilots that flew in the Vietnam War, and the
mm,
ones that they ended up captured and they were POWs, and how they struggled through that and how they came out. Most of them survived through their time being a POW, and they came back to the military, and many of them went back to flying again. In fact, when I was flying C-141s, there were 3 colonels in my squadron who had been held POW in the Hanoi Hilton in North Vietnam. And just reading their stories gave me so much, I want to say, admiration for them, but gave me a feeling of, I want a challenge in life.
Mm,
I want to do something really exciting and different, and I want to be a pilot myself. Now, nobody wants to go to war or be a POW. That I wasn't aspiring to do that, but I was aspiring to fly. And I should mention one other thing: the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, they ferried airplanes through the 4 years of World War II, and many of them have books. I think there's only a few that are still of those women that are still alive today, but many of them have written books. And I also read about the what they used to call the Powder Puff Derby, where the
mm.
women would air race back in the 1920s, and there were some really cool women that. So I would say books were a huge influence on me. And today I try to encourage young people, boys and girls, to put the phone down. For you need your phone, but I
Mm,
think we spend too much time on our phone. And I tell them phones make you dumb and books make you smart. So
mm.
limit your time on the phone and read more books. I read science fiction. I just loved reading science fiction about, what could be. And I also encourage reading history, especially at my age, I'm reading a lot of history, and I absolutely love reading history. And I've come to believe that human nature doesn't change. Even our technology changes, but people, we're still the same people. The essence of us as humans has not changed over the centuries. We're still the people that make mistakes, and we just need to learn from the people that have gone before us.
I love that you became an avid reader so young. And it sounds like because of the challenges you had growing up that you kind of pushed through all that. Were there any relatives, friends, other people kind of cheering you on as you were announcing that you wanted to be a pilot, or was it just kind of starting, did it just one of those things you just pushed through to do?
Okay,
Where did
remember, it was a different world back then. And I would say the second part of your question, it was just one of those things I wanted to do. I did not tell anyone I wanted to be a pilot. When I
wow.
was, it probably started in middle school, mostly in high school. I'm like, yeah, I think I want to be a pilot. I was afraid that they were, now remember at the time, this is the 1970s, and there were very few women pilots. In fact,
Yeah.
the people in my hometown probably didn't know a single woman pilot. And I didn't want them to say, what are you, what's wrong with you? You can't do that. You're a girl. And so I never told anybody. And I just started working this on my own. And I was just like listening to the stories on, sorry about that. You're going to have to edit that out. Let
That's
me go
fine.
back and start over.
Okay,
I
that's fine.
thought I got rid of that, but I didn't.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's good.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna go back.
Yeah, we
Uh,
can start them. Yeah.
so I did not tell anyone that I wanted to be a pilot. And the reason is I didn't want people to say to me, you can't do that. You're a girl,
Mm,
because there were so few women pilots back then. So I didn't tell anybody. I never really had a mentor other than the people in the books that I was reading about.
mm,
I would say my first vocal leap into flying was in between my junior and senior year in college. The Air Force had just opened up flight training to women. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a test program, and I could apply to that test program. So I knew that for me to be competitive in the upcoming Air Force test program, I needed to go get some flying time. So I had saved up money from my part time jobs, and I went to my local airport and asked them to teach me how to fly. I had to tell my parents I was doing that. And I told them, and they were like, really? What do you want to do that for? But they never told me I couldn't do it.
mm.
And I really don't remember them saying, oh, that's great, go for it. I think they were just maybe a little bit in awe that their daughter just out of nowhere decided she wanted to fly. I don't think they knew what to do with that. So they just kind of watched me go, and I took the flying lessons. accumulated. I soloed out within, about 8 hours of flying. I did my first solo, started
Wow.
doing cross countries. I passed my ground test and etc. And that helped me get into the Air Force flight training program. And my parents, I would say they were supportive in that they never told me I couldn't do it. But again, growing up in a small town, the
Yeah.
only real mentors I would have were my instructors. And one of them was AJ Davis, who he was my first instructor, and he had been an F4 pilot in Vietnam. And when I found out about that, I'm like whoa, he became my hero. Like, you flew F4s? I'm like, that's really impressive. But he taught me to fly the Cessna 150, and in that little airport, Elmira Corning, in upstate New York, and got me soloed out before I went into the Air Force. So, long answer to your question, but when you're the first doing something, there really aren't a lot of mentors out there. I think that mentoring is really important because if you think about the number of women back in those days that never went into flying, they really didn't have any role models unless you read books or knew who the women Air Force service pilots were, or unless you happened to notice that there was a woman airline pilot. There were so few of them back then. It was just something you didn't even consider. Back in those days, I graduated from high school in 1974. You could be the big giant. You could be a nurse, a teacher, a sister, like a nun in the religious field, or a secretary. And those were kind of the four big ones that we would choose from. But now there's for women, there's really no limits. I mean, you can doctor, lawyer, airline pilot, engineer. You can go into science, astronomy. I could just go on and on. There's so many. Uh, it's all open, and I
It's
honestly don't think we should take it for granted. And I think as women, we really need to continue to show how that we are competent in what we do. And I think that's just the world that we live in.
I love how you had that internal kind of wisdom not to tell everybody right away when you were doing it until you start taking the course, and then just that your parents didn't like say don't do it, but they didn't get all excited. So what happened when you started getting when you got into the military and you started progressing? And then did you know when you were a high school student and you were going and getting those hours that you wanted to be an astronaut? Was that your kind of high goal, or was it just to continue to
Yeah.
fly?
Well, I actually decided I wanted to be an astronaut in fourth grade. And I
Okay.
remember the moment very specifically. I was sitting at my desk uh, reading a magazine that was, I'm forgetting the name of the magazine now, but it had an article on the Gemini astronauts. Okay, there were no books on astronauts yet because this is too new. So this is a magazine article. And it had profiles on these different men who were test pilots who had been, and many of them were engineers. They were selected to be Gemini astronauts. And I thought they were just the coolest people I had ever heard of. Why is that? Why did I think that? Maybe is it my genetic makeup? I don't know, because I didn't, no one around me was really talking about the space program. So I decided I wanted to be just like them. And that's when that little bit was set in my mind that, there were no women. I go, I'm going to be a lady astronaut. And at that age, I didn't think that women were excluded. They were. Women were specifically excluded. I didn't know that. But I said, I'm going to be a lady astronaut. That's what I'm going to do. And then, of course, I think that thought probably went out of my mind on and off throughout the years. Uh, but it came back when I was in college, and the year was 1978. And NASA selected their first women to fly as astronauts on the space shuttle. And that was the same year I graduated from college. And I went, this is a reality now. I could actually do this. So I had already majored in math. So I had the proper degree to be eligible to be an astronaut. And I was on my way to Air Force pilot training. So I had like the road was just kind of starting for me. From that point on, I was just fully focused, zoned in on becoming an astronaut someday. And everything I did from my college graduation on, whether it was, finishing my flight training, the degrees that I sought after my bachelor's degree. I went on for master's degrees. Uh, Things like uh, I went and got a glider license. So I wanted to I want to call it stack my resume that looked good. So when my application went to the astronaut program, it would be accepted.
And you
So
did. I mean,
the
you
whole
went to
thing
Stanford,
unfolded.
right? You did a lot. I mean, not only did teaching, so you get more hours. You went to Stanford and got your master's, and you just continued on. When was that moment that you're like, I'm ready, and th this is the moment? When was that time, and who was there, kind of supporting you along the way to help you as that was getting ready to happen?
Yeah, so I think I needed a little more confidence in myself. I tried to send an application in when I was first eligible, but I was eligible, but I was still really young and I was really not competitive at that point. I filled out the application, but the last thing I needed was a letter from my wing commander, and I never got it. And that's one of the mistakes I made. I recovered from that, but I should have had the courage to ask my wing commander to write me a letter. I did
Mm,
not have the courage to do that. I thought because I was new, they'd be wondering, like, you just got here. Why are you applying to the astronaut program? I mean, you haven't even been here a couple of months. So I let that one go by. And then we had the Challenger accident happened. And I was in graduate school when the Challenger, that was 1986. And so that year they canceled their astronaut class. And then I to make a long story short, the next class that I was in position for, that I was eligible for, I applied. And I had to get over that worry of, do I have to go to my boss and have him write me a letter? I did that. And I was very surprised. Now I have a new boss. I'm at a new place. And he said to me, I think you'd make a great astronaut. I'll be happy to write a letter for you. And,
wow.
I had to get over that. I would say I had a little bit of lack of confidence in myself, even though I had this big passion. But I eventually got over that and found out that my boss, would I call him a mentor? Yeah, I would. And this was when I was teaching in the math department at the Air Force Academy. He really encouraged me to not only apply, but to go beyond and to do the extra things like taking extra courses at night to help improve my resume. And let me say one other thing about a mentor.
Yes.
Way back when I was first applying for uh, the flight test program for women in the Air Force, and I was only 21 years old, I actually flunked the eye exam, which made me ineligible for pilot training. That was one of the biggest downers in my life. I remember going back to my dorm room and I was just, I mean, I was a mess. I go, there's my dream down the drain. This I was 2020, near and far. This I was 2020 only for reading, but for distance, it was 2025. And that kept me out of pilot training. Well, a couple of days go by and word got back to the colonel that was running our ROTC detachment at Syracuse. And he called me in and he said, Miss Collins, I'm going to send you back to get that eye exam done again. I want you to rest your eyes. I want you to take care of yourself. Don't study so hard. Take that eye exam again. Wait 2 weeks. Well, I went back and I passed. And
Whoa.
that colonel didn't have to do that, but he did that for me, and I will never forget him. He passed away a couple years ago. His name, I mentioned him in my book. His name was Colonel Hagen, and he had flown in Vietnam also. He had flown B-52s and F-4s, so he was kind of, you know, big pilot hero for me. And he gave me a second chance. And I've learned throughout my life to give people second chances, whether they made a mistake or whether something didn't work out the first time. Give people second chances, maybe give them a third chance if you can see that they're trying and something didn't work out. And I think that gesture that he did to me has really affected my mindset towards other people for the rest of my life. And oh, by the way, a little funny side story. I started eating carrots because my mother told me that carrots help you have good vision. I ate so many carrots that my fingertips turned orange. And
Funny.
I am not exaggerating. My fingertips turned orange, but I passed the eye exam. and I made it into pilot training.
And
So
wow. And he called you out and said, come here. I want to talk to you about this. He saw as a leader what your talent was and your drive. I mean, you didn't go to him and say, hey, can I retake my eye test? Right? Was that?
that's correct. I did not
And
ask to take it
wow.
over again. I thought, of course, I was only 21. I thought, well, it's the military, it's the final word. But I learned about giving people second chances, and like I said, I am more inclined to give people second chances now, just because of that kind gesture. Uh, that I mean, I remember when he called me in, it was a little bit scary. I'm like, what is he calling me in for?
Mm.
And I had already given an assignment to go do something else, and he's like, no, I want you to be in this test program for women flying airplanes. And a lot of people say, well, the men don't want the women there. That is not, the vast majority of the time, that is not true, because so many of the men that I've worked with have given me second chances, have been great bosses, have communicated well. People make mistakes. I try to separate mistakes from somebody intentionally trying to uh, you know, do something negative for my career. I don't think that there's very many people out there that are trying to stab somebody in the back. They exist. I've worked with them. There are people that are so competitive, they do something to make you look bad. Those people are in the minority. When you find them, just avoid them. Just don't be around them. Be around people that are supportive and are going to help you with your goals and are going to really have a team concept in the way you work together.
And I want to talk about that for a moment too, from the time that happened until you got to um, launch the first um, command, be able to launch the first capsule into space as a woman, American woman. Talk about the leadership that you got during that time and the leadership you took on during that time, because to be able to command that first space mission for you, for a woman, was incredible. So what
Yeah,
led
so
up to that?
I'll go back to my my answer about having a mission statement.
Okay.
My mission statement for myself is always be the best pilot you can be. That's on the professional side. I wanted to be the best commander I could be. And I didn't see myself as a woman commander. I just saw myself as a space shuttle commander. I had seen many great role models before me. The two missions I flew as a pilot, I had two great commanders. Although they had very different styles, I was able to watch them and work with them. And I would say, let the parts of their leadership style that I think would work for me, I let those rub off on me and I learned from them. And as I began my assignment as the commander of my first mission, it was all mission focus. That mission happened to be the launch of the Chandra X-ray Observatory, and I had a crew of 5.
Mm.
The most important thing to me is that we fly this mission safely and successfully, and everything we do is going to be energy towards safe and successful mission. That was a $2 billion telescope. At least that's what it was worth back then. I'm sure it's worth a lot more now. It's still up there working wonderful, the Chandra X-ray Observatory. But we did everything we could to be the best trained, to be the best, I want to say, knowledgeable. I remember telling my crew before we launched, you are the best people in the world right now to execute this mission. Do not second guess yourself. Have
Mm.
confidence in yourself. You are the best in the position that you're in right now. You are the best person in the world to do this. And I think that was really important for astronauts as we're up there in space executing a mission. We can see things a lot sooner than the flight controllers or the engineers on the ground, because we're right there looking at the telescope before we deploy it. On its way, it went a third of the way to the moon to do its mission. And
Mm.
so I think it was really staying mission focused. And I wasn't out there trying to promote myself. I know that there are people that would do that, like, oh, I'm the first woman commander, so I'm going to make sure that I do all the press interviews and I get in all the magazines. We didn't have social media back in those days. Thank God I didn't have that. That would have just been an extra thing to think about. But I didn't. I said, for the year that we're training for this mission, we're not doing any publicity. All of our time is going to be focused on a safe and successful mission, except for I scheduled a few like half days where we would have a press conference and the press could all come in and ask us questions at the same time. And that way we wouldn't have like being pulled out to go back in those days, like you had to go down to the studio, have my crew going down to the studio to do an interview while we're training. No, that's not going to work. So we just stayed very, very focused on doing the best job we could. I think today's astronauts do the same thing. The difference is today we have social media, and it's not only a fun thing to do, but you have an expectation to do it. And if you don't, it's like you're not doing your job. So the
Mm.
astronauts need to be on social media today. And I think that's important for them because as a NASA astronaut, NASA is a government organization and the taxpayers are basically paying for the space station and all the research that we're doing up there. By the way, the space station is a national laboratory. So our astronauts are researchers on a national laboratory. And there is an expectation to be out there sharing what you're doing on social media.
I think it's interesting that, you're bringing still it's keeping them focused as a team, and that was your role as a commander, right? To keep them focused and to not be letting the other noise come and distract you guys. So, how did you when you were getting ready for, your different missions, like the one right after Columbia tragedy, the STS 114, how did you adapt your leadership style to guide that team and to help them in those moments of high stakes? Can you
I really love that question about adapting my leadership style after the terrible accident. So in we lost the Columbia, was coming home from its mission. The wing broke off basically and they tumbled out of control and 7 astronauts lost their lives. And I knew all those astronauts. My
Mm,
crew knew all of them. They were our friends. We knew their spouses, their children, and you just go through the grieving process. And it's like a shock at first. Like, I can't believe it happened. It takes like days, even weeks for it to like, yes, that really did happen. And you've
mm,
got to get through that. But the other thing, since I was actually the commander of the next flight, at that point in time, I had my training stopped because now we're into an accident investigation. I'm not training for my mission anymore. So I had to figure out what's my mission now.
mm,
2 of my crew members went off to do family support, and that was very important. And 3 of my other crew members went to Russia to launch on the Soyuz, so I lost them. And so I decided for myself and the one remaining crew member, who was a Japanese crew member, Soichi Noguchi, we decided that we are going to go around and talk to people, and emotions were running high, but talk to people and listen. So I spent probably the next couple months just talking to people all throughout the shuttle program and listening to their story and learning. And you asked me what I changed in my leadership style. I became, number one, a better listener. Prior to the accident, I was thinking, well, I'm the commander. I need to figure out how to do this.
mhm,
No, not always. I think you're a better leader if you listen and people appreciate the fact. Yeah, you don't have to do everything that everybody suggests, but it's so important that they know that you listen to them. And the second thing that changed about me was I think I started working on my humility. And I say this because you can blame aircraft accidents or shuttle accidents on the fact that the boss was not approachable and he was intimidating people, and people were afraid to speak up because the boss was intimidating. And it became important to me to make sure that I was not intimidating to people. And I'm not exactly sure. Was I intimidating? I don't know, but I'm going to make sure based on what I say and the way that I look into people's eyes, I am here to listen to you
mm,
and make sure that they knew that I cared. And then I would say the third thing that changed about me that had more to do with teamwork, not really me as much as the team, is to think more creatively, whether
mm.
it's doing the everyday things a better way or innovating and doing something entirely new that we've never thought of before. So I think of creativity really those 2 different ways. And so I try to encourage the people around me to think more creatively. Those are, I would say, three big changes in my leadership style that I hope other people notice that I was being a little bit different in my leadership style. But I've learned that sometimes when you're working with a lot of men, they don't want, though, if the boss is a woman, they might be thinking, oh, well, my fifth grade teacher was really intimidating and, she put me in timeout or da, da. I don't know what their background has been working with women. So I try to make sure that I am looking people in the eye, telling them what you have to tell me is important. I came here to listen to you. I might have questions. I might just say, "Hey, how's everything going here? Do you like working here? Are there better ways to do things? Do you have any suggestions? Is there something you don't like about the way we're doing this?" And really just, and it is amazing. People will just start talking and they'll tell you all kinds of things. And you're like, whoa, I didn't realize that. And for me, this is also a big safety. If you're in the flying business or, basically anything that has to do with safety, it is so important that we talk to each other and that we listen. So, that's why I love that question. I'm going to stop there. I could go on and on because there's so much to say,
I
but
think it's important. And I think right now, you mentioned social media earlier, and that is a distraction. You talked about focus, you talked about listening. And I think so many leaders today are so distracted. And I think teams are distracted and they're not clear. And I love how you brought up the listening and the communicating and how important both of those are. The other thing that's going on in my mind, Eileen, is as I'm thinking through all this, is you're raising a family at the same time. You've got two young children, right, at the same time that you're commanding the STS 14. Is that correct? Isn't weren't they young at that
yep.
point?
When the accident happened, my children were age 7 and 2. And then when we eventually flew the return to flight mission, they were 9 and 4. They need their mom. Now, one good thing about that, I was home almost every night. I was home. There were a few nights I was away, but I always made sure my airline pilot husband was home the days that I was not home. And
Mm,
that's good because they got time with dad without mom around. So that worked fine. We also had a nanny because I often had to work like beyond 6 o'clock when all the like daycare's closed, or if your kids in aftercare in school, they got to get 6 o'clock. We have insurance. You can't stay here. Uh, Kids can't stay here beyond 6. And so I had a nanny. I never worked her more than 40 hours a week because I didn't want her to be exhausted. And
mm.
also the women astronauts and the guys, we all helped each other out. If my nanny called in sick, I'm like, hey, can I bring my kids over to your house? So we had that kind of support. But I will say the reason I got through all that was I felt like I had a high energy level. And I think the reason I did was I became a runner when I was in my 20s, and I'd run. And I think all that running, and I didn't run long distance, I would run like 30 minutes. I
Mm.
think too much of anything isn't good for you, and too much running is not good for you. So I would, run 30 minutes like 2 or 3 times a week.
Mm.
And, I pushed my kids in the stroller. The other thing I did, when I'd have my daughter in the stroller, I'd be taking the space shuttle procedures with me, and I'd be pushing her and reading the procedures
My
to her.
goodness.
And I'd be saying like, "Hey, hon, if we have a fire in the number one engine, we're gonna pull the throttle, and then we're gonna hit the fuel cutoff switch." And I'm sure she didn't understand any of it, but her mom was there, so it was. And I take him to the pool and I kind of drag him around in the little floaty thing. And I loved being a mom and I loved being an astronaut, and I thought the two of them actually went pretty well together. Uh, it's tougher today on the women astronaut and the men, but for all astronauts, because many of them go to Russia to train and they go over to Europe to train, and you're gone for long periods of time.
So
So it
that
is
was
tougher today. You really need a spouse that is supportive. And, my husband was very supportive. It's a little tougher having an airline pilot husband because we have to work the schedules, but we did it. So I would say I had the two best jobs of being a parent and being an astronaut. I say I got the two best jobs. So get out of bed every morning.
yeah, and the fact that you were able to, because you were a mom, a working mom, and you were commanding a team at home and getting ready for your launch, you were able to be that person that kind of was listening to them and understanding them in a different way, probably. And I think sometimes some of the best leaders have done both, right? They've been able to do both. So can you just describe to us what that moment was like, when you became the first American woman to command a space? What was that moment like? And how did you celebrate that moment when you made it
Yeah.
to space?
Well, the moment itself was all about getting the mission off. And I know there were a lot of people down there at our launch. I remember the women's uh, soccer team had won the World Cup that year, and they were all there for the launch. And all these people, like the Apollo 11 astronauts, all three of them, they were the first men to walk on the moon. They came to my launch because it
Wow.
was an anniversary. It was actually I get this, the 30-year anniversary of the first moon landing. So Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins all came to my launch. There were a lot of people at the launch, and I was in quarantine, so I didn't have to like schmooze with everybody because they don't want us to get catch a cold or get sick or eat bad food, or so we're all in quarantine. But it was cool to know that all those people came. But actually, the moment of launch and even throughout the mission, I wasn't thinking about being the first woman commander. I was thinking about, hey, I'm the commander. And by the way, I had the experience of being an aircraft commander in the C-141 like a decade before, more than that, and flying around the world in an airplane as the aircraft commander with a crew. So I kind of had the mindset of how to be a commander, because of my military experience. And so I just felt like I fit really well in that role, and make sure that my crew's taken care of. I mean, the first thing is like make sure that we do the mission, and then make sure that my crew is taken care of. Make sure that I'm talking to mission control, that we don't have any barriers to communication, that there aren't any doubts about what did that person mean when they said that. And so all those normal things are going through my mind. I was the first woman to land the space shuttle. So there was a little bit of pressure from that. And many of my women friends who are pilots in the military and in the airlines would send me emails like, Eileen, do it for us. Eileen, show them that women can land the shuttle. And I'd be thinking, I better make a good landing, because if I blow a tire, or if I land fast or land slow, or if I don't land on the center line, it's going to make all women look bad, and my friends are going to be disappointed in me. I went through a little bit of that, and I said, stop it. You're trained. You can do this. Just focus. And so I actually made a really good landing. my first landing was at night at Kennedy Space Center, and we were lightweight, which made it a little bit, I want to say, a little bit easier to land the shuttle when you're lightweight than when you're heavyweight. And I walked away from that mission, and I was like, whew, it's over. Thank you, God, that we didn't make a mistake. And, just thank my crew, thank the ground crew, thank all our instructors, thank the mission control team, because, it was really a team effort to get that mission off. And that's one other thing about being the commander or being the boss, or, whatever you're doing, you really know that how the team performs is so, so important. And they just did so great. I remember they had this big poster that said, it takes a team to make a dream. And
Mm,
I'll never forget that. I thought that was, and they all signed it. And, people would write, welcome back, crew, uh, you know, and the fact that the workers all signed these posters, I still have many of them. Many of them are in storage. I can't throw them away. So everything comes to the commander after. And so I
well,
think, looking back, I was like, whew. But then I think is when all hell broke loose, because I had to go on all these like David Letterman, Jay Leno, Oprah show. There was a Regis and Kathy Lee. I mean, most of these shows aren't on anymore. This is 20 years ago, but all of these, many of them live. Like when we did Oprah, it was live.
well,
And oh yeah, they act a lot different when it's live, because they got all these constraints they have to work around when versus when they record. And so I was like, I went like in the next year, I was in New York City 11 times. And meanwhile, I'm raising my daughter. My son wasn't born yet. He was born shortly after that mission. And like a year after the mission, my son was born. And that part, the post flight was really challenging because I was not trained to be like out in the media,
Mm.
talking to reporters. I really had to kind of learn that through experience,
One thing,
and that was hard. But here I am. I wish I knew back then what I know now. It would have been a little smoother.
it's all good, but I love how you talked about the teamwork and how you didn't even even think about what you were doing until you were back down on ground, probably because you had so many things to think about. But one thing you mentioned that I want to make sure all the leaders hear is they set the tone. And I think it's really up to the leader how the team operates, right? And just everything you've shared today about the listening and about looking in the eye and about just really the mentors, all the men and your husband and the different people that have been around you supporting you and then just having that mission internally that kept you going. So as we get ready to close out, you've inspired so many to attempt to do something that was once seemed impossible, impossible. So what would advice would you give to offer someone right now who feels meant for something bigger, but they just can't see how to break through right now? It's just there's too many barriers. They're looking at external factors, I think. What would be advice that you've learned that you would want to share as we get ready to close out?
Yeah, other than, that I had mentioned this already about having a mission and staying focused on that mission, I would add to that reading books. It's something that, and you have a book coming out, and I'm sure that's just a great advice for your listeners. And I also would recommend, not only reading about like, experiences that people have and how to be a better leader, and, people have made mistakes, how you learn from their mistakes. Case studies are a really good thing to read. Like in the case of being a pilot, I would read accident reports and, what did we learn from that accident? What did that person do wrong? How can we make sure it doesn't happen again? And the other thing about reading books is reading about great leaders. Pick somebody that you admire. There's almost always some kind of an autobiography or biography about a person that you can read about their life. And in there, there'll be stories about setbacks they had and how they overcame that. And we can't really look at our, people we admire and think they did everything perfect, because I guarantee you they didn't. I mean, I look at all the mistakes I made through my career, but read about them. I have always found it very inspiring to read about, in my case, military pilots, civilian pilots, astronauts, and the things that in the books they've written and the things they've done. So I think that's the advice I would give. And I don't want to tell people not to do social media, because you kind of have to do that nowadays. You have to be involved. But I think it's really important that we limit how much time we're on social media. And that's really hard to do. I'm kind of addicted to it myself, and I'm trying to come up with techniques like having a time frame, because I mean it's addicting. I'll start going and I just like
Yeah.
because these things, they have algorithms, they know what you like and they keep giving you more of what you like. And yeah, it's kind of spooky in a way. It's like, oh, they
It
know who
is.
I am. But I think it is, and I still read books, and it is so motivational to me to like, oh, that leader did that, that was a bad decision, or that leader did that and that was good, but what if they did it the other way? Well, we'll never know, but we can think about that. And I'll tell you, when I was a teenager, I read a book called Once an Eagle by an author, Anton Myrer. Now, the book was written probably in the 70s, and it was so good they made a miniseries. You might remember miniseries from back in the
Yeah.
80s. And it was about two leaders in the military that had two totally different leadership styles. One of them was, he was like the soldier, and the other one would just, kiss the boots of the generals and, just kind of hang around the generals and, rub noses with them and do whatever they wanted. Both of those men made it to general officer, which is the highest rank you can reach in the military, but they did it in different ways. And of course, I admired Sam, the one who was the soldier's soldier, and I want to be like him. And I'm just a teenager reading this book. Now, I haven't read it since then. I'm sure if I read it today, it would be totally different. Once an Eagle. It
Once
used
it
to be required reading at the military academies, and there's a lot of, um, if you like to read about like the social side of what it was like to be in the military, that's in there too. So the author put in about these two men, their personal lives and how their families worked and dating and all that kind of stuff, along with how their military career and promotions progressed. So I recommend, reading. And I really hate to like recommend one certain book, but I mentioned Once an Eagle primarily because we're talking about leadership here. But I just find something that you like and read about great people that have done great things.
Well, I hope they read your book because it is amazing. And Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars, it is. I'm just in awe of all the stories in there, and I want to thank you so much for spending so much time today with our audience and so many lessons learned. And if people want to reach out to you or learn more, is there a good place where they can find more about what you're up to? Or
Oh,
is
sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and
oh,
I don't put a lot of posts on LinkedIn, but I end up reading a lot of stuff there.
good.
um, the last post I put there is what is an astronaut, because we have a lot of commercial astronauts today and people that just
Yes.
like Katy Perry, who just goes up for one flight. And I also posted like the book has been made into a documentary film, and it's called Space Woman. It's not out yet, but we hope it's streaming sometime in end of 25, early 2026. Um, I don't know what platform it's going to go to yet because we're doing screenings now with individual companies. But it's
Awesome.
I posted there's a trailer to Space Woman that's on my LinkedIn account that you can, it's only 2 minutes long. You can enjoy that.
Well, good. We'll put it on this podcast as well so that people can see it as well. So thanks again, Eileen. It was been a pleasure being with you today. And just thank you for sharing your amazing wisdom and for breaking barriers and being your humble, authentic self. It's just so encouraging to see. So we just appreciate it so much. So thank,
And thank you, Dana, for what you're doing. That's really important.
thank you. All right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Amazing.
I forgot to ask you before. I've seen your name spelled and people pronounce it Dana
It's
instead of
Dana.
Dana.
You said it right. You said it
Okay.
right. It's
I
Dana.
thought you said
Yeah.
it, but I was like, I just